again, we're a hands-on museum with lots of kids, so viruses is not a new topic for us. The corona, this particular COVID-19 is a new virus, but I don't know how much contact you have with third graders, but they are virus factories on a good day.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where professionals in the attractions business can get tips, tools, and even a bit of inspiration.
Join us as we tackle some of the most important topics facing the attractions industry today and gain insights from some of the top leaders, creators, and influencers from the exciting world of theme parks, zoos, museums, aquariums, and family entertainment centers.
Because this show is created by Attraction Pros for Attraction Pros. I am Josh Liebman, Director of Business Development for Amusement Advantage. I help attractions understand and improve their guest experience.
And I'm Matt Heller, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting. I help leaders lead and work with attractions to increase employee engagement and retention.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and enjoy the leading resource for attractions industry professionals, the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I am doing pretty well today, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well today, too, and I'm very much looking forward to the guest that we have on today, who has the same name as you.
Well, the same first name, yes. Matt Johnson from IMAG in, as you would say, beautiful Fort Myers, Florida. Before we jump into talking about him, I have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
So if you were going to study science or history, which would it be?
Ooh, I don't know. I can't say that I didn't fail either of those, but I don't think I really excelled in either of them too. I think that there are certain elements of both of those that I've been drawn to, perhaps at different times over my educational life and into adulthood as well. And then some other ones that perhaps hasn't resonated as well with me.
Okay, well, that's a good non-committal answer.
Yeah.
Well, I think I would lean toward history.
Okay.
And part of it is because I'm noticing, well, not right now, but as I used to travel, around, and I hope to travel again very soon, I'm very interested in the history of the places that I'm going to. And so I think we've even talked about this on a previous episode where if I can take an extra couple of hours or an extra day in a city or in an area, I'm going to find something historical that I can go visit, a historical attraction or something like that. So I can get an idea of what the area is all about. But one of the things I'm really interested to talk to the other Matt about is, how they're marrying sort of science and history, and how you really have to study both in order to have a good idea of not only what happened, but why it worked or didn't work from a scientific standpoint.
Right. So the IMAG Museum of both History and Science walks that line very well. And it's something that we don't necessarily see too often in the attractions industry, usually, especially in museums. Perhaps if, let's say, you go to a very large city, take Chicago, for instance, there are very specific disciplines of museums that you can go to, and they're all, large, institutions within their own.
Right.
And by taking those two together, you're really able to see the importance of how they work in tandem with each other. So it's a very interesting model of delivering that content to your visitors.
Exactly. So I'm really interested to talk to Matt about kind of the marriage of those two in that facility. But he's also got a wide-ranging background in Southwest Florida, and obviously with the Florida Attractions Association. So I'm really interested to kind of talk about all that stuff. This should be a pretty wide-ranging conversation.
And he is a fellow FGCU alumnus. So go Eagles, Dunk City. I'll just throw that.
Very good. Very good. So are we ready to get to Matt's interview?
Let's do it. Matt Johnson, Executive Director at IMAG in beautiful Fort Myers, Florida. Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Good to see you guys.
Likewise, great to see you as well. Matt, we're looking forward to chatting with you today. Before we get into the list of questions that we have for you, can you just give us a quick intro and I would say a little brief description of IMAG for those who might not be familiar and your role at the museum as well.
Sure, absolutely. So the IMAG History and Science Center is the result of a merger of two museums that have a long history in Fort Myers. One of them started off as the Fort Myers Historical Museum, opened back in 1982. In 2001, became the Southwest Florida Museum of History. The other is the Imaginarium Hands-On Museum and Aquarium, as it was originally called, that opened in 1995. Now that was rebranded to the Imaginarium Science Center in 2011. And then in 2017, we merged the two museums, the Imaginarium Science Center and Southwest Florida Museum of History, to become the IMAG History and Science Center. So it was a physical merge. It was a branding merge. And in addition to that, we also formally separated from the city of Fort Myers that had managed both facilities. So the city continues to own the facility, but we are now managed through a private nonprofit. And my role is the executive director of that nonprofit that manages the center.
And so you've been part of this process for several years. Can you give us just a quick background of kind of your career throughout, the Fort Myers cultural scene, I guess?
Sure. Well, I fell into it accidentally. So I was up at Florida State in Tallahassee. Didn't really know exactly what my long-term career goals were. And my uncle was an English professor at this new university, Florida Gulf Coast University. And I was chatting with him, and he said, "Hey, why don't you transfer down here? We got this great young university, really small classes, and move down here to Fort Myers." So in 2000, I moved down to Fort Myers and was a history student at Florida Gulf Coast University. And one of my professors left the university and became the general manager of the Fort Myers Historical Museum. And she asked me as a student to come in and be the educator and historian of the museum. So just a job to do while I was finishing up my degree. And about a year into that, she ended up leaving. And at the time, the city was operating the facility and was still a strong mayor form of government. So the mayor and I were talking, and he said, "Hey, would you mind being the interim manager while we figure out what we're going to do at the museum?" Well, that turned permanent. And about a year later, a similar situation happened over at the Historical Burroughs home that's right there on the river in downtown Fort Myers. The manager left, and it was kind of left in limbo. Mayor calls me up again and says, "Hey, got another one for you. Can you kind of oversee this and figure out what we're going to do with that?" So we brought the Burroughs home in, and we're kind of managing the two together. About a year after that, again, same story, the Imaginarium Hands-On Museum and Aquarium that was being operated by the city. The manager left, and she went over and became the director and president of the new nonprofit that was operating the Edison Ford Winter Estates. So they separated out from the city and left the Imaginarium kind of in limbo. That was a little different conversation because the Imaginarium was underwater, wasn't doing very well. They just dried up all their reserves. They were about $120,000 over budget. And the conversation was, well, we need to eliminate this facility because it's becoming a burden on the city. Well, I went over there, and although the staff was a little bit in disarray, they hadn't had a manager for about a year, but the facility, I really fell in love with it. Even though I had a degree in history, I always have loved science and been fascinated with science and experiments and hands-on museums. And my dad was in the Air Force. We spent about 4.5 years. He was at the Pentagon. And so we lived in Virginia, in Northern Virginia, and went to the Smithsonian and the Air and Space Museum. So I grew up around these fantastic museums, and I saw, some great opportunity there. And so that's when we formally, this was in 2005, we formally merged the Imaginarium, the Historical Museum, and the Burroughs Home under a city umbrella. And that's how we managed the budget shortfall by eliminating the triple administration that existed and having one administrative management team operating the multiple facilities. And that was the Department of Cultural and Historic Affairs for the city. And that's how we managed it from 2005 until 2017. There were a couple, forks in the road along the way. At one point in 2013, I left and became the manager of the Harborside Event Center. When that manager left, ran that for 3 years. And then the last 2 years I was with the city, I was the assistant city manager and operated the community development department. And so I was kind of a jack of all trades, running around the city, doing kind of whatever job needed to be done. And in 2011, we started talking about kind of what the long-term sustainability of these facilities was. And that eventually became this plan to merge the museums and create a more sustainable model. One that transitioned to private nonprofit management, to take advantage of fundraising opportunities, to have a much more efficient staff. Running things under city government, there's a lot of red tape and a lot of rules and regulations, from purchasing to hiring, everything else that really makes it inefficient and doesn't enable you to operate at the speed you need to. And so we started that process, went through it, and in 2016, we were finally able to get approval from the city for this separation. And I decided at that point that I was gonna jump ship and leave the city and take on this new role, managing the new center starting in January of 2017.
Matt, it's really fascinating to hear that story and kind of how everything all those puzzle pieces have kind of been put together. I'm curious, you talk about the benefits of combining those two facilities, certainly staffing and administration and that kind of thing. But I'm also curious about some of the challenges of, weaving in the different stories and weaving in the branding and just combining two very different facilities into one.
So other than the efficiencies and all that, the real conversation in the merger was, how we can do our mission better. Our goals were, we had two missions. We wanted to educate on the history of Southwest Florida, and we want to educate on STEM topics and science. And we looked at that. And so the reason why we want to educate on history is we want people to understand their world. And to understand your world, you need to know where you came from. You need to know the events that happened, the people that were there, the decisions that were made. What was a series of events, cause and effect, that walked you through the history that brought us to where we are today. And on the flip side of that, we were talking about the mission of the Science Center. And why do we teach science? It's the same thing. We want to understand our world. How does it work? Why does it work? And so we're trying to do the same thing. Why do we separate them? And in separating them, we create an artificial demographic split. And the History Museum, by far, was visited by older adults. Because for some reason, history is for older adults. Well, you don't have to have experienced history to enjoy history or need to learn about it. The Science Center was overwhelmingly visited by children. Well, there's nothing about science that says when you turn 15 that you should no longer be interested in it. And so it was more about how they operated that was doing that. So the History Museum was things in cases. And I remember the first thing we told groups of students when they came in was to put their hands in their pockets and be quiet. Well, that's not fun. That's why they don't like history, because they think it's boring and you can't touch it, and it's special behind a piece of glass, and that's not that exciting. Well, on the Science Center side, we encourage touching and interacting, and that experiential learning. So why can't we bring that to history? On the flip side, with science, and one of the reasons why older adults aren't drawn to it quite the same, is because it lacks relevance when you talk about physics, or you talk about chemistry, or you talk, the old adage, why am I learning algebra? I'm never going to use it. It's not true. You use it every day. You just don't know you're using it. And the same thing with physics and chemistry and the hard sciences. So how do you bring relevance to science? Well, you bring it local. And so the example of that, and what really brought us to this idea, is the river and the water issues that we have here in Southwest Florida. To tell the story of water issues in Southwest Florida, you can't just tell the science. You can't say, hey, look at all those evil men back at the turn of the century that destroyed our environment and ruined everything. No, they didn't. Those were engineers that had a job to do, and that was to protect people from dying from floods and hurricanes. And they engineered a system that would remove the water, allow farming, allow development, limit flooding and catastrophic events from happening. Now, they obviously made some mistakes in doing that, but the reason why they did it, the history behind it, was very much as a public project. So you need to understand the science of why it didn't work, because we need to understand that to be able to fix it. But we can't fix it without understanding why we did it in the first place. Otherwise, we're just going to go back to a system that doesn't work again and causes other problems. So looking at that, we said, well, why don't we do that with everything? Why don't we tell the whole story? And so our mission became understanding the world through the lenses of science and history, that you need to look through those two lenses to truly understand your world. And so that's the reason why the physical merger. And so when we look at exhibits now, we look at things like, all right, what's the story behind this? And how can we tell that story in addition to, what are the hard sciences, and what do we need to tell to talk about how this works and why it works? So, that was completely different discussion from the economics, the efficiencies, and those sort of things that were more the sustainable, how can we create a model for an operation that will last a long time, versus how can we create something that's a better model for our mission.
That's really interesting. And, you make a great point that usually, history and science are two completely separate silos kind of operating, and the demographic segmentation, is prevalent wherever you go, whatever city you're in. If you go to the History Museum, you go to the Science Center. So then was this model, was it benchmarked or based off of anything else that you've seen out in the industry of these museums merging, or was this just a completely, I would say, grassroots innovation coming from within?
Well, it's by no means unique. We're not the only one. There are other examples in Florida. Up in Jacksonville, there's the Museum of Science and History. Up in some of the larger children's museums and science centers have a history component to them. COSI up in Columbus, Ohio, the Historical Society rents space within the center and has history exhibits. So it's not a unique take. I think we took it to an extreme level, one that completely merged the two. And to be honest, our original conversation was to build another building and have two museums on the same campus, history over here, science over here. And so the idea that we're merging them together and making them inclusive is definitely one that's more unique. And when we started talking about it, it was definitely unique. Now, we've seen over the last 5 years a lot more facilities looking at this sort of idea and doing more of an interdisciplinary approach. And maybe it was my time at FGCU when I was there. It was early on. In fact, I was part of the first, I wasn't there for 4 years, but I was part of the first graduating class in 2001. And they didn't have minors at the time, and we all minored in interdisciplinary studies. And so we took classes that were dual taught One of them was an economics professor and an ecology professor, and they taught a class on economics and ecology. So, maybe it was that interdisciplinary background. And so that's the idea of what we're trying to do. So no, it was not unique. Our particular take on it definitely had some unique aspects to it, but I think it's an idea that people have looked at for a while.
So, Matt, I'm curious, now that those are combined, are you seeing a cross-pollination of the demographics? Like the older folks, are a little more engaged in science, and the younger folks are a little more engaged in history?
Well, we've, I think, absolutely accomplished our goal of introducing younger folks to history, and been able to really engage them in the history exhibits. And some of our most engaging exhibits are history-based. Our first major exhibit expansion after the merger was adding a virtual reality experience, which was Virtual Fort Myers. So we 3D modeled the fort as it was in 1858 during the Seminole War, and created a virtual experience where you could go walk through the old Fort Myers, literally for the first time in 150 years. And so we've absolutely been able to engage that. We've had some success on the flip side in getting seniors and older adults more engaged in science, although we still, our demographic trends younger at the center. And that's more a result of physical limitations. And we still are a center that has a lot of kids. It's loud, it's fast paced, it's bright and noisy, and bringing a group of senior citizens in for a guided tour alongside 150 second graders, there's some logistical challenges to that. So I think we've done well in getting them engaged in sciences. But we're still working through kind of what are the logistical issues with making it an experience that they truly enjoy, that's not just overwhelming with noises and lights and dozens of third graders running around like crazy.
Yeah. One of the things that we're really interested too, and you mentioned this a little bit, is the business model of being the private nonprofit and kind of having the ability to kind of disconnect from the oversight from the city, which is not something that's completely 100% unique, but it is also, I would say, somewhat rare to cultural institutions. So I'm curious as far as advantages to that, but also any challenges that might present for you as well.
It was interesting because we did a lot of research. In fact, we used PJV. That folks you probably have talked to them on Attraction Pros. They're very active in Florida and have done a lot of projects here, and did a lot of research on business models for museums. And the typical business model is there is no typical business model. There is everything from government run to private to for-profit to not-for-profit, and everything in between. Some of them have for-profit gift shops attached to nonprofit museums working on government facilities. So it's all over the place as far as the model. The biggest challenge with the government model is government. And government operates at a pace that works for government, and it's designed around a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 model, and is designed around fairness and ethics and all of that in purchasing and in human resources. And so to take something like a museum that needs to be dynamic and it needs to be fast paced and it needs to change with the times and be able to jump on the new TikTok platform, the day after a major pandemic hits, because that's the way you can reach people. Well, getting a government to open up its servers for TikTok is a whole process, as it should be, because we don't want our government servers easily accessed, and they should be safe. So it's a model that is challenging. It works in that typically that means that the government is funding the museum, and so there's some safety in that model. I would argue that what we saw was it became a crutch. That we were not doing things that we should have been doing because we didn't need to, because at the end of the day, if we needed more money, we went back and asked for more money. In addition, there is a challenge to that and a threat that exists there, that you're at the whim of a political body that at any time could say, man, this is not what we want to do anymore, you're gone. And you really would have very little recourse at that point to change anything. And so it's a challenging model. Now, the nonprofit model, the model that we have is the city of Fort Myers still owns the property. And this is not unique at all. In fact, the Edison Ford Winter Estates, the Burroughs Home, the Sidney and Burton Davis Art Center are all similar models where the city owns the property and it's managed by a nonprofit. What that gives us is a little bit of stability, and the city still has a vested interest in our facility and to provide support for our facility. But the day-to-day operations are free to operate at the speed of business. And we can hire and we can take on, take risks and do things out of the box, without running into issues of, public records and purchasing policies and those sort of things. So, the model we have, I think, is a great model for what we were looking for, which is to create a sustainable organization, one that, doesn't every year have to fight for its existence, but also have a strong foundation and a support structure like the city to fall back on in times of need.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the different business models, whether it's nonprofit or profit, there's so many different ways to run a business. I'm curious too, because there's so many factors within Florida that can help a business. There's a lot of talk about Visit Florida and those type of things. And I'm curious from your standpoint, what are some of those best practices to engage with other associations or organizations that actually help bring tourism to Florida or Southwest Florida, knowing that you are in your perpetual leadership role with the Florida Attractions Association. I know you're very involved with that. So I'm just curious kind of on that standpoint, looking outside of IMAG, but also kind of the entire state of Florida.
Well, we're lucky in Florida because we have by far, and this is not just a bragging, this is fact, that by far we have the best statewide support structure for an attractions industry. So from the Florida Association of Museums, the Florida Attractions Association, Visit Florida, those organizations, the rest of the country looks at those organizations to model their organizations. In fact, when they created Brand USA, that's the national marketing agency for the country, they hired the CEO of Visit Florida and modeled it after the Visit Florida model. And so taking advantage of those, should be a no-brainer. And the resources that are available. It was interesting because I got engaged in the Florida Attractions Association in 2007. I had worked with the Florida Association of Museums going back to 2001. And when I got involved with the Florida Attractions Association, I was talking to some of my museum colleagues. They're like, we're not an attraction. We're a museum, and we're different. And what I found, and the reason why I ended up getting more engaged with the Florida Attractions Association, is the different models that are out there, and in particular, working with the for-profit industry, the for-profit attractions industry has taught me more than anything else. In understanding that, one, we're a nonprofit. That has nothing to do with us wanting to make money. That's a misnomer. And I think that's one of those crutches that you fall in with the city. Our job is to make money. The only difference is we reinvest all of that money back into our mission. And so it is our job to make as much money as we possibly can, because that means that we are putting more money into our mission, and we're putting more into what we do and the reason why we exist. And so looking at it from that approach, and my experience with the Florida Attraction Association, and sitting on the board with folks from Disney and Universal, and folks that run small family businesses, that it gave me perspective on things that have been just essential in being successful, in my own operation. Visit Florida, I've been involved, for the last 4 years in particular, with this fight to save Visit Florida. And, where we are right now in the middle of this pandemic just solidifies the reason why we need a statewide marketing agency. We need it in the good times, but we really need it in the bad times. I have a master's in public administration, and, everybody hates government. They hate paying taxes. They hate government getting in their way until you need government. And the problem is you got to have government there when you need government, which means it's got to be there when you don't need it to be there when you need it. And so it's the same thing with Visit Florida. When they go away, everybody goes, "Whoa, what happened?" Well, that's because they went away, because you're taking them for granted. So, being involved with Visit Florida and what they're able to do with making Florida not a destination within the United States, but a destination equal to the United States. When we compare Florida as a destination, we don't compare it directly to other states because we're so far ahead of them. We compare it to Italy and England and other countries. So to take advantage of what we have in this state, from Florida Attractions to Florida Association of Museums to having Visit Florida, and now with IAPA, although they're a federal organization, IAPA is basically a Florida organization now. When I first got involved with IAPA, they jumped back and forth between Las Vegas and Florida. Well, eventually they said, why don't we just stay in Florida? And so, having that, if you haven't been to an IAPA show, it's one of the most amazing shows that's out there, and hopefully that will be one of the things that kind of gets us back to business as usual here. But we have some great organizations around the state that really support our industry like no other state does.
So why is there this, what seems to be this perpetual battle to keep Visit Florida funded and moving? If everything that you said, if Florida is not just being benchmarked against, the United States, that Florida is a destination to the equivalent of Italy or, a large tourism-based destination.
Well, if you ask a politician, they're going to tell you it's a complex issue that has a lot of things. It's not. It's very simple. The Speaker of the House has way too much power. The Speaker of the House decides what the agenda is going to be for the state. And then the last two speakers in particular have used that authority to strong arm their ideas. And so the Visit Florida fight has been because the last two speakers have had a very libertarian view and small government, and they got the idea that Visit Florida was a subsidy for Disney and Universal and large, very profitable organizations. And why would the state taxpayer fund marketing for these very successful organizations? Now, taking aside that being just wrong, because that's not what Visit Florida does. In fact, Visit Florida gets more money from Disney and Universal and the big organizations than it gives back. And it supports the small organizations by allowing organizations like IMAG to participate in marketing programs that we would never be able to afford otherwise. And its general mission, and what it does is it attracts people to the state. It doesn't care where you go once you get here. The goal is for Visit Florida is to get it to your state. The goal of your local DMO is to get it to your county. The goal of your attraction is to then get those people to your attraction. So, it's a tiered approach. And so in this libertarian model, again, going back to what I said before, is everybody's like, well, we don't need government. One of the things that, even my representative here said, which I had to have a conversation with, was, well, Florida markets itself. Again, Apple is one of the most profitable companies in the world. The iPhone by far is the most popular individual device out there. Did they stop marketing it when it hit the top? No, they doubled down on that marketing to stay on top. And so Florida should do the same thing, and that's what any business would do. But government isn't seen that way. And so there was a $75 million pot out there that, unfortunately, one individual, starting with Speaker Corcoran, and then continuing on, decided that was a pot that they should go after, and a model that they didn't like because of their libertarian views. Now, typically, it would have been, okay, that's one person's idea, let's have a debate. Well, the speaker has so much power that he would not allow that debate to go on the floor. And so all of the bills that the vast majority of Republicans, Democrats, this is not a political thing, the Republicans, Democrats agreed with and wanted to take to the floor to debate, reauthorization and funding of Visit Florida, weren't even allowed to go to committee. And the speaker has full authority to allow them or not allow them. So the fight has been strictly that we've had two consecutive speakers that have taken Visit Florida as kind of their model for how they're going to reduce government. Luckily, we've been able to fight that, keep them around. We got a great reauthorization this year for three more years. Thank goodness we did. Thank goodness Visit Florida now has 3 years of support to be able to get us through this pandemic that we're going through now, and this crisis. And who knows, we're about to enter hurricane season, and that's in the past has been Visit Florida's one of the great roles they've played in supporting the state. And when somebody says a hurricane hits Florida, if you ask somebody in Ohio, they think a hurricane hit all of Florida, when in most cases it only hit one area. And so that's what marketing does to support that. So hopefully, from what it looks like, we've got some leadership coming in the House that I don't believe are going to take as hard line on Visit Florida. And hopefully we've kind of seen an end to this attack. And I think what Visit Florida is doing and will do when we kind of get back to business in the state of Florida is going to be seen as just so essential that hopefully that conversation is done.
Yeah, excuse me, Matt. You've been talking a lot about the pandemic that we're in right now, and I don't think we can avoid that topic fully in the conversation. So I'm curious from your standpoint. Obviously all of our attractions are closed, across Florida, across the United States, across the world. But I'm curious what kind of conversations you're having either with other people in the attractions world, people in your businesses. What's the outlook that you're seeing? And then, kind of as a follow-up to that, what do you see as your plans when we do get to reopen?
So yeah, I think that, this is going to be a long-term recovery, particularly for our industry. We're a hands-on museum. Personal interaction and touching and interacting with things is what we do. And so even as we go through the phases of reopening, it's going to be a challenge in our industry and how we, change our model to work with that. And so, again, back to the last conversation, the fact that we have these organizations and I've been working a lot with the Florida Attractions Association as the chair right now, obviously, in putting together resources and support for the attractions industry as we do this. And right now we're in the middle of and about to release our best practices for reopening. So, what does reopening look like for phase one for that, continuing the strict social distancing and cleaning, and what does it look like in phase two where that can be relaxed a little bit, and phase three where it can be relaxed even more, but on the same note, it's still out there and we still need to take protective measures. So I don't have the answers, and I don't know that anybody does. There isn't a book on this one. I think we've all figured out hurricanes by now. That's easy to do. It's not a fun thing to go through. You know, I go back to Charlie was the first hurricane I went through in this industry, and so we've been through lots of those, and we know how to do it. We know how to do it well, and nobody does it as well as Florida. No matter how devastating the hurricane is, we get back in business very quickly. This is not a hurricane, and it's not one that there's a book out there. So we're writing the book as we go. And so, you know, I think the conversations now are centered around, you know, what is that new normal going to look like? And platforms like Zoom, you know, for the last month, we've taken everything digital and gone virtual with programming, and had some great success with that. So what does that look like in the phased reopening? But what does that look like in the long term, I think, is a question too. And how much of this digital knowledge that we now have, are we going to be able to say, okay, well, you know, maybe there's something we can do with that, you know, even in normal times. So yeah, reopening right now is the conversation. And, you know, I think there's some great organizations and associations that are working on that. And again, we're lucky in the state to have these collections. You know, my wife is a real estate director for a major retailer, and that has a national chain of stores. And so they're looking at this as well. And what they don't have is what we have. That, you know, all of the national retail stores are not getting together trying to figure out what their plans are. They're all working on it on their own and working on it differently. And what do we do here? What do we do there? Whereas in Florida, whether you're, you know, a restaurant, a hotel, an attraction, a museum, the resources that are out there to be able to do this as a unit, which I think is going to be successful. You know, having one attraction do it one way and one attraction do it another way just causes the public to not necessarily trust it. If everybody's taking the same approach and one that has been debated and talked about within the industry, the public is going to be more trusting. And that's really going to be what brings us back, is the public trusts that we're doing everything we can to make it as safe as possible.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that you, along with the FAA, are putting together reopening strategies, and you mentioned the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Are you able to share any components of even what phase 1 might look like?
Yeah, so, you know, phase 1 is the biggest challenge for our industry. So phase 1 allows the reopening of what they call mass gatherings and you know, gatherings of folks up to 10 or 25 people. But you have to keep that social distance. And how do you do that at your gate? You know, I think we've learned a little bit from the food industry, and you know, when you go to Publix and they've got the 6-foot lines drawn out to keep you separated. You know, probably what most attractions are going to do is have their staff mandatorily wear masks. Again, masks are not a protective thing; they're protecting others. You know, we talked about, you know, are we going to make everybody wear masks? But is that even a feasible thing to be able to do? And then the cleanliness and you know, we have a theater, so we have a 100-seat theater. So we'll be looking at spreading those chairs out in that phase 1 where you know, people can't sit next to one another, limiting the number of attendees based on square footage. And this is a model that's being tested out by Universal in Singapore right now, where some of their attractions have opened up. And again, being a part of this industry, we have attractions that are opening up in other parts of the world that are trying some of these things out. So we have these test models and resources that we can take advantage of. So the people on the committee that are putting this together include Universal and the Lowry Park Zoo and the Florida Association of Museums and the Association of Science and Technology Centers. So again, there's a lot of diverse impact that's going in there. So phase 1 is really going to be how can we reopen on a very limited scale and keep people separate and open small pieces. So it's going to be attraction by attraction. But I'll give you an example. Some of the drive-through attractions. We got some great drive-through safaris here in Florida. Those may be able to reopen to full service. They're just going to have to address the ticketing piece and how they can keep that safe. But you're in your car driving through, so there's very little need for additional social distancing. But places like some of the dinner theaters that we have here, those are a challenge, where they, the whole model is pack as many people in as you possibly can to get the most profit. And particularly when food's involved, you require that mass to be able to make it profitable. So those are going to be the biggest challenges, where you'll see a limited opportunities for some of the mass gathering places, but some of the other ones will be able to open more. Phase 2 is really going to be where, and that's 4 weeks of constant decline is kind of what the trigger is for phase 2. So you have to go through a 2-week period of decline to enter phase 1, and then another 2-week to enter another 2-week period to enter phase 2. So when that phase 2 period comes up, that's where you'll see the most attractions, I believe, open back up with limited social distancing, but not as strict as we're seeing now.
When you say decline, you mean decline in total number of cases?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's based off of kind of just the aggregate.
Yeah. Based off the numbers coming out of the state. And again, it's not clear whether that's going to, it looks like in Florida, it's probably going to be a statewide effort. And then there may be areas that have to backtrack and institute more strict ones. So I think that's the model that the state of Florida is going to take, rather than individual counties opening up and everything will open kind of back up, and then some areas where there are spikes again will have to fall back.
Yeah. Matt, I appreciate you sharing the timeline and some of those details of that tiered approach. At the time of this recording, we just heard, I think it was yesterday, that Georgia said that they were going to allow bowling alleys to open at the end of the week. Excuse me. So I'm curious about those conversations too, because you get the all clear, and that doesn't mean you can just flip a switch and reopen. Right. So I'm guessing there's also conversations about, okay, when we do get the okay to open, now we've got to get our staff back. We got to get our equipment working again. We've got to get our food orders in. So I'm curious too about sort of that, that time frame of when we get the thumbs up to go. Are people thinking it's going to be a couple of days, a couple of weeks? Like what do you think they're looking at? And granted, it's going to be different for different attractions, but just kind of thinking about what people are looking at for that time frame.
Yeah, I think it really is going to be all over the place with the way that as different as attractions are. Ours in particular, we were lucky enough to get our paperwork in early, and last Friday we got our PPP loan deposits, so we got the funds. So we've got 8 weeks now where we're fully staffed, even though some of them are working from home. So getting them back in and getting back into operations will not be a logistical issue for us. But others, that weren't able to get that and have furloughed or even laid off their employees, that's going to be a challenge. And we're going to lose some attractions and some restaurants, and there are going to be some that don't make it through this, which is very unfortunate. And hopefully, they'll be able to kind of come back and at some point in the future and rejoin us. But I think it's going to be a strange process, because I don't think any of us know how it's going to work. And you look at Georgia, and I don't want to comment on who opens and who doesn't. I think we all want to open as soon as possible. I think my take on it is I run a science center, and so I'm going to follow the science. And I listen to the doctors and the scientists and the models and the data that hopefully is going to drive the state of Florida, hopefully the country, in how to do this. Because we will make it through this, but the worst case scenario I can see is we reopen and then have to close again. I think that is the death knell for for a lot of our industry is if we have a false reopen. That's going to be hard to recover by. So I hope everyone follows the data and listens to the scientists and those folks that are not doing this for a political gain on either side. They're doing it because that's what the data tells them to do.
Yeah, and you make a great point. I think that's one of the big parts, or one of the big parts of the uncertainty is this false reopening. Before we started this interview, Matt and I were talking about kind of the announcement in Georgia that just happened very recently at the time of this recording, and we kind of said there's no one's going to win a prize for being the first to open after a pandemic. That if it takes a little bit more time to ramp up, that that hopefully will be for the best, even if it's a couple more weeks that may have been lost from that. You did mention that that you got the PPP loan. You were able to keep all of your staff on payroll, which is phenomenal. Curious what's their day-to-day tasks look like, because they are at home. They're not mixed in with the operation as their normal job. What is your leadership look like during this time?
Well, so yeah, it's a different situation. We've got some areas where it's really business as usual. So we have animals that we care for at IMAG, and so obviously that was priority one from day one. And I made that very clear to our staff that no matter what happened, that we would keep the appropriate staff in place to continue to care for our animals, and have done that since day one. So a lot of them are still doing that. That's their number one day-to-day job in particular, and they're continuing to do that. What we've done with them, though, is we've shifted them out. So we're trying to limit the number of people that are there at any given time, and obviously asking them to keep the highest of hygiene standards and keep things washed down and cleaned. Secondly, we went through about a week and a half process of just deep cleaning the whole facility after we closed. And again, we're a hands-on museum with lots of kids, so viruses is not a new topic for us. The this particular COVID-19 is a new virus, but I don't know how much contact you have with third graders, but they are virus factories on a good day. And so we clean all the time anyway, because there is so much hands-on activities. So we stepped it up for sure, but it was not a new process for us to clean our facility. The other thing I've done is looked at this as an opportunity. It's an opportunity I'd never want to have again. But how often do you have, right now we have an 8-week period where our staff is funded, and we don't have any guests, and a lot of the programming that we typically do is not being done. And so all of those things that you want to do, and Matt, you're very good at having webinars and teaching us how to do all these great things, and treating our employees right, and having manuals and programs and operating procedures. And well, guess what? We don't have the time to do all that stuff.
That's right.
Well, right now we do.
Yeah.
And so we have this brief window that, again, I hope we never have again, where all those things that were, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we had, a written manual for how to open and close. Yeah, we know how to open and close and which light switches to turn on and off. But when somebody comes in new, we've got to physically walk them around and show them all these things. And would it be nice if we had that written down? Would it be nice if all the scripts we had for all these programs we did were written down in a book, and all our procedures were put together? So most of the staff that's working from home are working on those SOPs and training manuals and those sort of things that sat on a back burner. We'll get to that when we can get to that, but we never had time to actually get to it. So we're doing a lot of that. And then the third thing we're doing is we've gone virtual with a lot of our programs. So those programs that we were doing at IMAG, we've taken virtual and had some great success. I'm a parent. I have 3 kids at home right now. And so I'm dying for anything that will entertain my children for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. Please entertain my children because they're driving me crazy. And both my wife and I are blessed enough to, both still be working full time. The daycare is closed, so we're now both working full time and taking care of our children full time. And so we saw a need right away for content. And so we put a lot of content out there. So, our Meet the Keeper program, we went virtual, and our Science on a Sphere programs, we go live daily with those programs. We're putting a whole lot of fun experiments, from the don't try this at home, just watch me do cool stuff, to the, hey, try this at home, because you probably got a bag of flour in your pantry right now, and here's what you can do with that. So we put a ton of content out there, and we're continuing to develop that. And then in doing so, kind of figure out, okay, what of this stuff that we're doing can become permanent? And what's a resource that, hey, we can probably do this long-term and get some additional engagement through that. So those are the three main things that we're working on, in addition to little projects and things that, again, that we never had time to do before. Now we have some opportunity to do that.
And then I'm just curious, are you using any of this to transition to any kind of call to action, whether it's for fundraising or support, or, giving the opportunity to support the museum during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple examples. So we started doing virtual birthday parties. We saw a few stories out there, and these poor kids, they have a birthday. They had a birthday party planned. It got canceled. And now their friends can't even come over for their party. So we use Zoom, and we do these virtual birthday parties where our education staff does some fun programming, but allows the kids to chit chat and talk back and forth. And we talked about it, should we charge for these? Can this be a revenue source? And the reality is, how do you can't just start that. We would have needed that built for it to happen. So we said, let's throw them out there for free. And then we'll put a little thing on there. If you'd like to donate, you will. And the vast majority of them have provided donations as part of that, but it's completely optional. Right now, our biggest campaign is through membership. And so we've taken our annual membership, added 6 months to it, and are asking people to support that way. So they're supporting us in a financial way and becoming a member, but they're going to get the benefit down the road of that membership and the perks that come with that. And it's also gaining an additional network of people that we can work with. So our main call to action right now is we're trying to increase engagement with new audiences that we can then work on monetizing and getting some return on that later. We are a nonprofit, and we are doing some fundraising efforts, but we've been a little cautious with the fundraising just because we don't want to step out in front of the need. And I had a lot of discussion with my board about this. Yeah, we have some need for funding, but we have some time now before we need to do that. And the reality is there are people that really need food. And so we've partnered with the local soup kitchen, and every Friday we're using our parking lot as a food pickup area, and we're helping to promote that, they need your donations now. And there are millions of Floridians that are now out of work and aren't getting a paycheck. And as you've heard, they're not getting an unemployment check. They may or may not have gotten that government subsidy check. And even if they did, we're now in, week 5 and week 6 of this, and even that's probably run out, even if they did get that. So there's some real need out there that we want to, we don't want to muddy the waters right now. But we are talking with our donors, and there'll be a time when we will then step in and say, okay, yeah, we need some assistance moving forward too.
Yeah. Well, Matt, that approach really kind of encapsulates what a lot of people are saying, is that we're all in this together, right? And certainly the museum needs resources, but you also recognize that there's people in your community that need those even worse right now. So definitely appreciate that thought process. And also want to thank you for your time today. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Really loved connecting with you. We're not going to get to see you this year at the Florida Attractions Association conference, so it was great to be able to connect this way. just in closing, if somebody wanted to learn more about you or learn more about IMAG, where would you send them?
Well, the easiest is to go to our website, www.theimag.org. But right now, the most content we're pumping out is on our Facebook page. So if they look up the IMAG History and Science Center on Facebook, we've got a lot of great content there, and links to all of our other places as well. But if anybody's interested, I know this goes out to colleagues around the state. My email address is matt@theimag.org, and you're welcome to reach out and talk with me about any of these topics.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you taking some time to chat with us. This was a really interesting, very wide-ranging conversation covering a lot of really important topics. We want to thank you so much for doing that, and for everyone out there listening, thanks for being Attraction Pros.
Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Attraction Pros podcast.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to drop us a line on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, and make sure to follow us on all the social channels.
And make sure you've subscribed to the show so you can get the latest episodes every single week. Also, if you're new to the show, be sure to check out all the great episodes and guests we've featured in the past.
And if you want to learn more about Matt and Josh and check out the best articles for you to operate your attraction most successfully, be sure to visit us at attractionpros.com.